Listen, that's a complex question. You need to break it down a little bit. Um, yes, clubs themselves, most of them spend more money than they earn because they get hit by events like they're threatened by relegation. They invest more in players. They can maybe get promotion or win the league. They get ambitious and they speculate to get to their prize. Star players get injured. So it's not a business that you can like plan with a lot of certainty. There's a lot of negative variables that can hit them. And then another one that you may find interesting is that you've got a contract with players that you agree. If a player has a very good start to the season, they want to renegotiate their contract upwards. But you will never see a player come to a club and say, I've had a very bad season. Do you want to reduce my contract? So it's a very difficult business. So yes, the clubs have overspent, but I'm trying to explain to you why that happens. Secondly, the leagues have not been given the power to impose things like financial fair play. These things are only recent. And then, as you can notice, not all of them are very efficient. You know, you look at what's happening in the English Football League just now with so many teams in trouble. Financial fair play has been attacked by some of the big clubs like Man City and PSG. It's difficult for the leagues to impose will on on their clubs. It's different in America, where the league structure is much stronger. In Europe, the clubs really want the league to do certain things like do a television contract, some central sponsorship, but then let them get on with it. So it's a great question. It's the key for the future of the industry going forward, because financial fair play has allowed some level of profitability in football, which has meant that it's been investable by some capital. Without financial fair play, it'll go back to the old days, and financial buyers, private equity funds, they won't be interested. They'll see that there's no profitability.
The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
Hola, a very warm welcome to the VAR Show, the show which talks about all the various major football leagues in detail. Today we are going to continue the theme of interviews, and we have former CEO of Scottish Professional Football League, Mr. Roger Mitchell, with us. He has also spearheaded many other giant companies like Give Me Sport and many esports platforms and various other organizations. So without wasting much time, I would like to first thank Roger for coming on the show. Thank you and welcome to the show. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing these days?
I'm well. I'm very, very well. I'm very, very happy to be on your show. I'm very impressed by the initiative you have to try and bring some of these stories to your audience. I'm fine these days. I'm based in Italy, and we have gone through the pandemic in quite a positive way. And I'm working a lot with my sport tech startups. That's been the main focus for me over the last 2 or 3 months.
Of course, and like I've seen, like you're doing a lot of, you have been involved in a lot of sports startup and a lot of podcasts also I've seen. And I wanted to ask you this, like, you have been involved in football industry for quite a while now.
Yeah.
Is football something you always wanted to be associated with, or was it something that happened by chance and you took it as a professional work?
Okay. No, it was definitely the second one. I a bit like yourself, I did sports journalism. I wrote some articles for sport when I was younger, whilst I had another job. And one or two of them got publicated and things like that, published. And that was really my involvement in sport as an industry. I had another career in the music business, and I was following that. And then this opportunity with the new Scottish Premier League came up. But I didn't have any thoughts at the start. I was a bit like you, just wanted to be in love with the industry and write some stuff and do some stuff, but it was never my career.
Of course, and like I wanted to ask you, like you mentioned like about the Scottish League, and like you were instrumental when it just started and it broke out, I think, from the Scottish Football League.
Yeah.
How difficult was it, for you to, or what was your, means you were charged with a lot of responsibilities, and how difficult was your task, to set it up and make everything go smoothly?
It's a very good question. It was incredibly difficult, incredibly political, because basically what was happening was what had happened in the English Premiership, where the very top leagues had split away from the remainder of the league clubs. And of course, many people got very angry at that. They said, you're running away with all the money. You don't want to distribute the money to as many people. It's all about greed. So there was a lot of bad blood, an awful lot of bad blood. So as a new league with so many people wanting it to fail, it was one of the challenges was to just make sure you could get some stability going forward. And it's still there, so I think we did all right.
Of course, and but like one thing that as an outsider I want to ask you is, like, a lot of clubs in Scotland have gone maybe like bankrupt due to various reasons. Do you think that's a fault in the league system, something like that, or what is it, the bad running from the club side?
Again, that's a very, very good question. Listen, that's a complex question. You need to break it down a little bit. Yes, clubs themselves, most of them spend more money than they earn because they get hit by events. Like they're threatened by relegation, they invest more in players. They can maybe get promotion or win the league. They get ambitious and they speculate to get to their prize. Star players get injured. So it's not a business that you can plan with a lot of certainty. There's a lot of negative variables that can hit them. And then another one that you may find interesting is that you've got a contract with players that you agree. If a player has a very good start to the season, they want to renegotiate their contract upwards. But you will never see a player come to a club and say, I've had a very bad season. Do you want to reduce my contract? So it's a very difficult business. So yes, the clubs have overspent, but I'm trying to explain to you why that happens. Secondly, the leagues have not been given the power to impose things like financial fair play. These things are only recent. And then as you can notice, not all of them are very efficient. You look at what's happening in the English Football League just now with so many teams in trouble. Financial fair play has been attacked by some of the big clubs like Man City and PSG. It's difficult for the leagues to impose will on their clubs. It's different in America, where the league structure is much stronger. In Europe, the clubs really want the league to do certain things like do a television contract, some central sponsorship, but then let them get on with it. So it's a great question. It's the key for the future of the industry going forward, because financial fair play has allowed some level of profitability in football, which has meant that it's been investable by some capital. Without financial fair play, it'll go back to the old days. And, financial buyers, private equity funds, they won't be interested. They'll see that there's no profitability.
Of course, and it's been a while since you have been involved maybe with the Scottish League. And in your opinion, how has the league evolved? Has it reached the potential that you and your other, colleagues envisioned in the beginning?
That's another really good question. Well done. I don't usually get asked that one. Uh, Listen, when I was there was the start of a trend, which was that the big five leagues would be separating. If you didn't come from one of the countries, England, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, you were going to be less and less able to compete because the monies from television were much less. So I tried to make our league, a small league, the Scottish League, compete with that by joining other leagues. And that was my big initiative because I could see that this polarization would kill Scottish football. Sadly, what I feared has happened. Scottish football is not important anymore.
Of course, and like you also had a background in finance, I think so, and you are well versed in the European game. What is your take on financial fair play?
Well, like I said before, I think it's a great thing to try and make the sporting franchises and clubs and assets attractive to investors with fresh capital, whether that is American funds or whether it is private equity or whether it is even sovereign buyers from overseas. Nobody wants to buy a business if it's not making money. So financial fair play should make the clubs profitable and was making the clubs profitable. And now you see so many deals getting done because the Americans especially like that. You know, they're buying things like Toulouse. A lot of Americans have come into Italian football at Bologna. And of course in the UK. If financial fair play disappears, then I think you may see the loss of interest of these financial buyers.
Of course, and like staying with similar theme, like of finances. I think EFL has introduced a salary cap. What do you think of it? Do you think like other leagues should take inspiration from it, or is it a bad idea?
No, like I say, I think it's necessary. You need to protect the clubs from themselves. I think that's the phrase I would leave you with. If you don't give the clubs a reason not to spend, they will spend because their fans will demand it. So these rules are actually a protection, in my opinion, for the clubs to allow them to say to fans and say to everybody, I can't spend anymore. Because the fans are difficult, very, very difficult. They demand that the owners spend and spend and spend.
Of course, and like I'll ask you about the Scottish League more, and like of late, many clubs, of well-known clubs, have tried to like exploit this Asian market because there's a huge, first of all,
Yeah.
population, and then you get the fans. So that is that something that like the Scottish League is falling behind? Maybe they can exploit because there's not much market here of like of the Scottish League, and like even if they tie up with some club here, maybe like that can start the fan base here of the Scottish League. Do you think that's
Yeah,
a probability?
yeah. Listen, again, a great question, and comes back to the previous one about the big five leagues and the rest. Um, you can only market yourself as a club really through the competition in which you play. You know, Celtic, who have done some tie-ups, I think, with an Indian team. The name escapes me. They've done good things, but sadly, they play in a league that has got no global appeal. You know, the reason English football has done so well is that it has got great distribution in all over the world. Every country in the world sees the English Premiership. La Liga in Spain is trying to catch up. The Bundesliga also now trying to catch up. Serie A used to be very popular and is now less so and trying to come back. And French football has never really had a lot of appeal overseas. But the smaller leagues have no chance. You know, like people want to see the clubs they support playing against other big clubs, if that makes sense.
Of course it does, and like you have, I think you have put it out Well, and since you mentioned unfortunately for Celtic or Rangers, whoever they have been tying up with, they don't have the competitive league that will appeal to the masses. So
Yeah,
realistically, where do you think the Scottish league ranks? In Europe itself.
where it ranks.
Like if you take in terms
Um,
of popularity or even competitiveness,
I think probably 15th to 20th place.
but why do you think it's so low? Because it has English neighbors, and some influence will be there. You have players moving like to and fro, maybe from both the leagues here and there. Don't you think it should be more higher? Like,
Well, this is the existential question that I wouldn't think I can give you the answer to on this podcast. In the 60s and 70s, Scottish football was very, very competitive. You may not remember, but in those years, all English clubs were full of Scottish players. Their success was really determined by the Scottish players they had in their team. Like Liverpool had Dalglish and Hansen and Souness. Nottingham Forest had Archie Gemmill and John McGovern and John Robertson. And I could go through them all, and they all had three or four, at least three or four. Our national team qualified for 5 World Cups in a row. And then at the end of the 70s, something happened in terms of us producing players. Many people have written many big reports on that, and we would need 10 hours to discuss this. My own view is a couple of things. Scotland moved out a little bit of the deep poverty that it had before. So, football is very good at being useful when the countries are poor. It's a game you can play with no money. You can play on the streets. You can play with any kind of ball at all. And Scotland, when I was growing up, everybody played street football. And now that wasn't the case going forward. Secondly, I think Scotland has got a relatively bad mentality problem. They again very complex. I don't think they like winners in football, but that's complex. We can't talk about that. It's too complex. But the main reason is the one I said before. Even if all those things weren't there, the Scottish market is too small. It's only 5 million people. But to answer your question, which is a good one, we should be doing better than certain other countries that are the same size, like Croatia or Serbia or Belgium or even Holland. And we've fallen behind all of them. And it's just that we don't produce footballers anymore.
of course, and since you said it ranks relatively low in terms of even the finances involved, how much of a hit has it taken or will it take because of the pandemic?
Well, everywhere, everywhere in sport, everybody that has got a business model that is much more dependent on fans in the stadium, and that's certainly in the case in Scotland because we don't have a lot of TV money. It's dramatic. It's absolutely dramatic. If you've got a lot of money coming from TV and corporate, then you can play the games behind closed doors and still make money. But if 90% of your income is from fans paying to get into the stadium, you're in real trouble. And I think they're in real trouble.
Of course, and moving on from that, you have also been involved in technology in football, and how important is technology in the footballing industry? Presently and going forward.
Yeah, another very good question. Well, technology hits 2 or 3 different areas. But basically, what technology has done is allow fans to get much closer to their clubs, to the game, to their heroes. So that means that you have to change the way you create content and you deliver content to the fans. In the old days, you really just would have a newspaper and you would have television. Now you've got fan engagement apps, you've got over the top, direct to consumer, podcasts, live interaction, watch parties. All of this is about getting the fan closer to the action. And that means that you can aspire to get fans much further away than where the game is actually played. Many Man United fans will never ever see Manchester Old Trafford, but they can still be fully involved in the club. So technology has allowed all of that in the kind of like marketing and content and enjoyment side of the game. In terms of on-field, there's so much technology now that's allowing you to analyse players, analyse tactics, look at recruitment, scouting, prevent injuries. All of this is generated by smart technology and nowadays machine learning and AI. So technology, to summarize all of this, has changed the business model of sport, and it allows it to become a B2C, a business to consumer model, and you get directly to the fans globally, whereas before it was B2B mainly. You sold to television, you sold to sponsorship, you sold to an overseas television company in the case of global rights. So technology is changing everything, and I think we've only just started. That's why I'm very excited.
Of course, and again, this can be a very, very ridiculous question, but in your opinion, what is the next big technological improvement or technological aspect that is going to be implemented in football?
Well, maybe I'm biased, but we mentioned before that the main cost for football clubs is the cost of the players. So when you have got players injured, the cost in terms of finance and in terms of performance is huge. So the main thing that can change is reducing the amount of injuries. And you can do that. The company I'm involved in is one called Zone 7, which uses very sophisticated AI to be able to have a very accurate prediction of when an athlete is likely to have a soft tissue injury. So we have reduced injuries by 75% in the clubs we work with. So maybe I'm biased, but that's my answer: reducing injuries.
Of course, and another controversial aspect that is going on is regarding the VAR. What is your opinion on it? Because for me, it's a tool. I spoke to many referees, and even I think they have concurred the similar idea or what I'm thinking. Like, they have said that it's a tool that will improve, that will cut out the wrong decisions. So how can it be wrong? Maybe it's not implemented in a correct way. But what is your opinion on it?
Again, it's a good way that you ask the question. In theory, it should be right in that it gives you an insight that the naked eye does not see. I think the problem is this. All of us who have played football know that some fouls are fouls even if they don't necessarily break a rule. And equally, some penalties are not penalties even when the ball hits your hand. So the human who knows football can apply what I call common sense. And that role was done by the referee. A good referee applied common sense. Didn't immediately take out a yellow card just because the foul deserved a yellow card. It depended on the temperature of the match. It depended on how he'd applied the cards previously. What I fear about VAR, and I am a fan of technology, as you heard, is that it is making the referees delegate their decision. Immediately they say, let's go to VAR. They are no longer using their common sense. And that's what I think the problem is.
I just wanted to put out my view. Okay, I feel
Sure.
when when the offside rule was first invented, I think many people had the similar opinion that it's not good for the game, or because it was like cutting down maybe some aspect which was followed for maybe 100 200 years, and it's very difficult to go for the change. I think it might be just been a transition moment where maybe in 10 to 15
I
years.
think you're right. I actually think you're right, but we must not make the referee somebody who doesn't control the common sense of the game. The robot can't sense the temperature of a match. A referee can. So yes, we're in a transition period. Yes, the way you say it is correct. But I've seen too many referees already listen to the microphone and they're almost saying, help me out, tell me what I need to do. And I don't think that's positive.
But again, to just put a question in that, like, isn't that a fault or maybe a place that is being vacant in the education of the referees, where they are not being
Yep.
educated properly, instead of saying that VAR is the problem?
Yes, you're right. The training of referees, um, I've had some experience of that, and I must say, in the main, I came across a lot of very good referees, and I know for that reason how human it is. It is the management of 22 young men and now young girls who have got a lot of competitive streaks. You have to be quite a personality to do that. So I wouldn't say referees are badly trained, but like anything in the world, when the new technology comes in and you're being told that it is perfect, you automatically just say, let's have a look. And I would prefer referees to be told you can still use your authority if you really feel strongly.
Of course, and yeah, that should be the case. Like, they should go with the gut instinct and then maybe go with the VAR if they have more doubts. So like, I'll move on from that, and it's like, you have also been involved in esports, and that is something that is coming up, and a lot of footballers also are involved. Like, I think Aguero has his own channel online where he plays, and like, that's something like, and even many teams have got in their team. So what is the industry that is lying forward for the esports? Is it like, will it take over football, like as in like the real sport?
Listen, esports as a business model is very complex. I'm not sure many people understand it. But what esports is something very serious. It is the younger generations telling us that they want to consume sports in a different way. We talked about being closer to the game. We talked about interaction. We talked about getting involved if possible. All of these trends are things that esport has grasped very, very well. The younger generations do things differently. And the challenge for traditional sport is how to adapt quickly enough to attract those new audiences and not lose all the older people like me who, as you said earlier, are maybe traditionalists. So I think there's a lot of scope for example, one of the other companies I work with does green screen virtual stadia. So you play sport basically in a big warehouse with green screens, and you can transmit the kind of like visual worlds that are prevalent in esport games and things like that. All these things are attempts to bring the traditional games much more to the attraction of the younger people who want shorter bursts of things, more action, lighter formats, more interesting formats. And that's the challenge for sport. And that's why I look in these areas. Esports in general is not something I've invested in because I can't see the business model. It's very complex.
But don't you think, like, like for football or a traditional sport, all the participants have to be in the same place, like, be it anyway. If you want to play for the best, maybe football, if you say English Premier League.
I agree. And that's why our thing that I told you about called Smart Sports, it keeps the teams, well, nowadays they use this term, the bubble. But let's say that you've got 8 teams, all there in Kathmandu, right? And you've got a very big building that has got a football pitch in it, and it's covered in green screen technology. We can play football tournaments with those 8 teams, and every night we change the stadium. One night you're playing in Kuala Lumpur, the next night you're playing in San Diego. The stadiums look cool, they look interesting. One day you're playing in the middle of the ocean, a stadium in the middle of the ocean. So this is what traditional entertainment has done with the Marvel franchises and the superhero franchises. I am here to tell you that I think sport will do the same.
Of course, and I'll move on to another topic, and which is personally one of my favorite. I want to learn from you because you have been experienced and you have been involved maybe in setting up when the leagues were in its infancy or just starting out. How do you structure out what you want from the league? How do you go ahead with the ideology, or how do you start?
Well, you're making a big assumption there that the person at the center has got the power. Normally what a league is something that is owned by the clubs that play in it. So, my league had 12 clubs in it, and I didn't have the power to just say, this is how we are going to do things. I was a politician that required votes. So I had to come up with my idea of what was right, and then convince everybody, or the majority of them, to vote for my idea, or otherwise I couldn't do anything. That's what people get wrong. They think people that run sports have got power. In America, they've got some more power because the commissioners are strong. But in Europe and other places, we are humble politicians that have to try and build a consensus, just like in any parliament in Nepal, in India, Italy, Scotland, anything. So you are being tested as a human about your ability to win over your argument through all kinds of seduction, persuasion, power game, horse trading, totally politics.
Of course, and I wanted to ask you, when you all were starting out in the Scottish League, how did you convince, or how did you manage to convince the teams to come and join you? Because they could have easily fragmented out to the other segment, or like how the Premier League was done, right? Like English Premier League.
Well, I mean that really that was relatively simple, for the reason of money. Scottish football already existed, and there was 40 clubs that shared all the money with some mechanism of distribution. So when my clubs left, they left because they were getting more money. They were sharing it with less people, and this was at the same time that there was more money coming into the game through Sky Sports. So it wasn't difficult to convince them that they should leave. The difficulty was getting enough votes for them to break away, and that was politically really, really difficult. But to answer your question, then I had in my league Celtic and Rangers who consistently looked to leave. They looked to leave and go to England or things like that. So it's a very, very difficult job, and the questions that you ask are correct because you don't have any power. You have your clubs very selfishly acting in their own interests, and you have to try and herd them like sheep in one direction, and it's very difficult.
Of course, and you mentioned how Celtic and Rangers wanted to go, and there's still talks which keeps on coming up every few years. Where will Celtic or where will Rangers finish? In the Premier League, some of them say they'll get relegated, some of them say they'll whatever. That is a topic for different day. And what do you think? Can it realistically happen that Celtic and Rangers go to the Premier League, or will it affect their brand? Going from champions who usually play in European football, maybe qualifying.
Well, that's a great question, but I've got a very strong opinion of that. Celtic brand playing in Europe and getting eliminated by small teams does nothing for your brand. your brand is a loser brand. Celtic have just been eliminated by a very small team. Last year they were eliminated by Cluj and Copenhagen, teams you may not even know. So there is no brand in playing in Europe when you get beaten by very small teams. There is total brand when you're playing in the English Premiership, even if you are getting beat. The fact that you're on the same pitch with clubs that the whole world recognizes is, it's like anything in life. You are who you hang around with. You are who you are friends with, it's the current situation doesn't work for Celtic and Rangers. They are two huge clubs. They can't attract good players. So today, if they went into the English Premiership, they would struggle. But in very, very short time, they would have the money to attract very big players. And then I would say within 5 years, they would be competing for the top six.
Of course, and realistically, I'm just asking tongue-in-cheek question: where would they finish? Will they get relegated?
Well, like I said, immediately maybe they would struggle, but when they could start attracting the players, they are such a big club with the money they would have. They would not get relegated. They would be challenging for the title. Once things settled down today, no, that's obvious. Today, no. But once they had many years of the monies coming from the English television market, they would invest them and they would be as big as anybody. Celtic's as big as Man United.
Of course, and going back to setting up the league, okay? Setting up the league. I had one very important question, a question, according to you, which league would function better? Something that is associated with the FA or something that is private?
Well, as you know, all these stories of breakaway leagues is exactly that. Even the English Premiership could do it with the FA. The FA had to sign off on that. And indeed, at the start in 1992, it was called the FA Premier League. The governance in football is complex, as it is in many sports, Many sports. You take golf and you've got the European Tour, you've got the majors, you've got the Royal and Ancient, you've got the Masters, you've got the PGA. Football's the same. You've got the FA, which is the overall governing body. They are the regulator. They are the people in charge of overall football. And you've got a league, which is a private members club to maximize the interests of its members. Often those two things are in conflict, especially around young players. The clubs want to keep their young players with them all the time. Then the National Association wants to take them away and train them to win the World Cup for the national team. You've hit on one of the big issues. The governance in sport is very messy, very political, keeps coming back to politics.
Of course, see, since I do not have any experience, I just organized a small school league and I know a little bit from there. I would think that the private one would be better because there is someone at the top who holds the utmost power.
But they don't. You think they do, but they don't. I've had that role and I had no power. All I had was the ability to suggest direction to my members that they either agreed with or they didn't agree with. I had no power whatsoever. And that's always the case. They will normally set up the constitution such that the clubs have the power. So yes, you're right. In theory, a private organization should be easier to manage, more focused, lighter on its feet, more flexible, more money oriented. But in reality, the clubs do not all agree and they've got self-interest. Everton and Chelsea do not have the same agenda today in the Premiership,
Of course, and another current affairs and something that I'm interested in, and maybe you were involved in the past was broadcasting at one point. Maybe I saw in your LinkedIn you were in involved with UEFA, I think, for some broadcast and transfers market somewhere. So
yeah. We're always looking at rights. Yeah, rights and production, things like that.
So I wanted to ask you: is it possible, or in the future do you see it happening that something like what is being like floated around in the gossip column, that like a Netflix of football, something on that lines, where you can get what you pay for, like only for your club? Is it a realistic target or something that can happen?
Yes, it is, and they already exist. In some forms that maybe aren't as famous as Netflix. You've got DAZN. I don't know whether you've got DAZN in Nepal. That's a pure play subscription sports service. You've got other ones like 11. The issue is this: sport has always been organised around geographical lines. The national broadcaster in India, Star TV, they had the English Premiership for India. They had it for India. And in Japan, somebody else had it. The companies you're talking about, the model of the companies you're talking about are global. They do not recognize borders. If I've got Netflix, I can see it anywhere, So for that to happen fully, and whether it would be Amazon that would do it, or Apple, or Google, you'd have to get rid of the geographical boundaries, I think. But it exists already. Look at DAZN. DAZN is already in that area.
So again, I just wanted to clarify, and whatever you said, I wanted to ask you, like, is it like, suppose if Apple or Google, like you said, uh, or Netflix, any other OTT platform, if they take over maybe the rights of a particular country or particular region, they can then implement the idea?
Yes, but they won't want to do it country by country. They will want to do it in a more efficient way where they buy a property with global rights. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well. If they want to have an investment in the Champions League, they don't want to just have the Champions League in Germany and not have it in Italy. It doesn't make sense. So they want somebody to sell them the rights on a global basis. So far, sport has not done that.
But do you realistically see that happening anytime soon?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It has to come. It has to come.
Of course, and like on that note, like I want to ask you one final question. Okay, like
Sure.
regarding again this league, if I were to start, or if I wanted to sketch out the ideology of what I want from the league, and how do I proceed with, what advice would you give me, like how do I start and what do I
Yeah.
focus
Okay.
on?
Good question. If you are wanting to start a league and commercialize a league, what you need to minimize is the number of meaningless games. Games that have got no outcome that's of any interest. What do I mean by that? Middle of the table games. Games where the game happens, and depending on who wins, the one person finishes 7th, one finishes 10th. No fear of relegation, no chance of winning any prizes. There's no commercial value in games like that in the main. Okay, so you need to have a league with as much competitive uncertainty as possible. This is where the American sports have done well with the draft system. They try and rebalance the power so that the worst team gets the best players next time. Many leagues in Europe have lost all of this now. Germany has Bayern Munich, Italy has Juventus, Scotland has Celtic, etc., etc. So my one advice to you would be to try and keep all of your clubs as close competitively as possible to maximize the uncertainty of results. People are interested in sport when they cannot predict the outcome.
Of course, and this is again a hypothetical question, because I'm very very far away from even thinking of starting a league, but that is something that's there deep in my mind, which I
Think
want.
about it. Think about it. There's no real value in Serie A for Torino versus Napoli when they're 7th and 8th.
Of course, I
Especially
guess.
for younger generations, they're not interested in that. Whereas there's real interest if you can create competition And even if it's not for the first places, you can create storylines and you can create personality, backstories of the protagonists. The younger generations want these things. They're not really that interested in middle of the table games of no sporting outcome.
Of course, and yeah, of course that depends on the viewers also. They wouldn't also want to go and see, even on
That's
stadium.
what I mean. The fans, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Fans, whether at the stadium
yeah.
or on TV.
Of course, and like on that note, I'll ask you one final question. I'll ask everyone this question, and it's quite controversial depending on how you see football. Whom do you prefer, Ronaldo or Messi?
Ah, that's a good question. As a football lover of beauty, it has to be Messi. Messi does things that is very, very rare. If you take it translate it into things like painting, like Messi is a wonderful artist. There's many artists, but some of them are just totally unique. So in terms of football, it has to be Messi. In terms of sportsmen and champions, I think Cristiano Ronaldo has maximized his abilities much more. He is a wonderful player, but he has improved his game. He has worked on his game. He has demanded standards of his teammates that I don't think Messi does. Messi, I do not believe, has leadership abilities. He's a wonderful individual, but he is not somebody to drag the team on his shoulders in moments of difficulty, and I think Cristiano does. So I think it's two different types of sportsmen. One is the complete team player in Ronaldo, in terms of the personality to drag a team forward. The other one is the ultimate individualist who has got magic that we have never seen before. But I think as a personality, he's got quite a weak head.
Of course, and like I just got this question. Okay, I'll ask you this. There are talks of him leaving Barcelona, and
Yeah.
you said like like Scotland doesn't have quite good viewership. How much of a difference does a person like Messi, if suppose hypothetically he goes to somewhere in Scotland, how much will it lift the league?
Um, well, obviously it lifts the league. Obviously it lifts the league. But keep coming back to what I said. I think, if Messi went to the Scottish Premier League, yes, many people would be interested, but they would be interested in a highlights package of him, a little kind of like 2 minutes compilation of what he did in the league. They wouldn't be interested in watching the team he played for, let's call it Celtic, against Hamilton for 90 minutes because it's boring. It's not high level football, but everybody will be interested in watching Messi play football. So if Messi goes to, let's say, a league that I'm not particularly interested in now, let's say he goes to the Chinese league. I am not going to watch the Chinese league, but I will look on social media for a highlights of the 12 times he touched the ball in the last game. You understand the difference? I think this is a good example of explaining how the difference between the 90 minutes, the context of the league that you play, and the power of the individual sportsman with clips and highlights. I think it's very, very different things, but the question is a good one to bring them out.
So of course, like I just have a follow up. Okay, I'm so sorry, I'm asking last questions again and again, and it's like you said, like many of them despise the Chinese league, saying that they are kind of like spoiling the game by throwing in money. But every league that started at one point was that, like every league that started at
That's a
any point,
that's a very good point.
like
That's a very, very good point. And
how can you say
even
Chinese league is spoiling it when even maybe the Premier League did it at some point
yeah,
when maybe
everybody
social
did it.
media was not there.
Everybody did it. And this is what our American friends have always understood better than us. The Americans have never been embarrassed by the role of money in sport. In fact, it's always been born as a business. In Europe, we have this idea that it was born as amateur and money is dirty. In many sports, tennis, rugby, they were amateur sports until very, very recently, and money was a dirty word. So, you have these attitudes still that what's called, with the French saying, the nouveau riche, the new rich, compared to old money. It's like a snobbery about, aristocrats against, people who have done well recently. I take your point. I, however, have no interest in the Chinese league, not because they're new, not because they're spending money, because I don't see the context. Remember what I came back to earlier. The context is important. Tradition is very important in European sport. Very important.
Of course.
As it is in Asian sport, like what happens in cricket in Asia is very, very traditionalist, okay, you did the IPL and things like that, but the traditions of the game mean something. You just can't start afresh. You have to be smart enough to respect the old traditions.
But then everyone has to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. But it's not in their interest, I don't think, to buy in players like Oscar from Chelsea, who have no motivation to go there apart from money, are not really going to try hard. It's not even in their interest, the Chinese league, to bring in people like that. It'd be much better to invest in the grassroots, have a huge volume of young boys and girls playing football, and then it will come up naturally. Because honestly, you have to do it from the ground up, because the people who play football and don't make it, they become the fans. If I just bring in big names, the fans aren't there. The culture isn't there. We are all fans because we played football. We all thought we could be a football player, and we still love the game. You need to foster the game from the grassroots.
Of course, Daniel, on that note, Roger, thank you so much for talking to me and giving me so much
No,
of your
my
time.
pleasure.
I wish you all the
My
best for
pleasure.
whatever you do in your future endeavors, and wish we can talk again soon. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, listen, anything I can do to help, let me know. And for somebody to reach out to me from Nepal, I'm very, very honored. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.